Brandon, good to have you here today. Brandon Kessler is the CEO founder of Devpost. We have run across each other and run in the same circles for as long as I've run Draft.dev. I think I've heard about you guys several years ago, and then officially we met in person at a conference recently. So excited to get to talk to you more. Give us the quick high level. What is DevPost? We'll start there, and then I want to hear more about your background and kind of how you got into it before we then get into the meat of this, which will be talking about hackathons.
Yeah. First, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for joining. So, DevPost is a platform for software competitions. Our mission is to inspire developers to build. So, when developers are looking to improve their craft, when they're bored, when they're either outside of a company or inside of a company and looking to come up with new ideas and be inspired, we want them to come to DevPost. And so we have two products. We have a public hackathon product. I think this is most of what we'll be discussing today, which is we power most of the world's hackathons. We provide the platform that makes it easy to run the competition, saves everybody a minimum of half their time organizing and participating. And then we have a large community that's global. And so we can bring those people to the competitions in order to build and be inspired. And then the last is we have a services team that helps organize, manage, market, promote these competitions. The second product is a private product for hackathons called DevPost for Teams. That's for inside your company, for your employees to do private hackathons and also private hackathons with your customers.
Yeah, I really want to talk. We'll talk a little about the private ones at the end because I think for this audience, it may be less of interesting thing, but I personally am interested in that. So I do want to talk about that because I think that's something that is getting more popular, and especially among bigger companies, you're seeing it more. But okay, cool. So how did you get into this? Because from what I see on LinkedIn, you were in media and writing, which it's funny. Similar in college, I think you started some publications. I started a publication, college news publication when I was on my campus. And then somehow I got into software engineering, and you went the other way and got into starting a business. And eventually, so it's funny to see
Cool.
that. Tell me about your background. Like, how did you get into this, and what is the pathway to DevPost?
Yeah, in college, I didn't start a publication. I started a record label. So
Okay,
in the
okay.
music industry. So close. I would sign bands, get them in the studio, oversee the making of the records, promote them, market, distribute it, and used a lot of internet for get them out of jail for cocaine possession, you name it. That was 12, 13 years of my life. And so loved it. And I really like working with creative people, helping their creative projects get out there in the world. But we use technology in pretty much everything that we did. And so after 12, 13 years of babysitting artists, I wanted to have a product that we could build that would grow and have an impact. And so I started seeing these grassroots competitions sprouting up on the web. Many of them were technology based, some weren't. There was an inspirational one. Hey, create a software program that allows Windows to run on the Mac before Apple let you do that. And in 3 weeks, there was like $14,000 collectively contributed by hundreds of individuals, companies, teams working throughout the night to solve this problem. And it was done in 3 weeks. That was really cool. I was blown away. And I started calling up these people that were doing these grassroots competitions, and they were doing them on their blogs, and there was no community. So at the time, created the company to be a platform and community for these skill competitions. And then we sort of pivoted our way in terms of what are the kinds of competitions that we're going to support? How can we focus so that our community understands the types that we're doing? And then eventually we just started focusing on developer competitions, software competitions, and hackathons. And since then, that is all we've done is software competitions. The thread between sort of music and having a label and what we're doing now, I think that it's closer to me, I think, than most people might think, which is working with people to be creative and to build and to make things and to help inspire them to do that and get the word out across both music and then now technology.
Yeah, cool. I could geek out on music stuff and engineering stuff all day just because that's also interests of mine. But I will spare the listeners.
Anytime.
Yeah, we'll have to do that offline. So let's talk about why hackathons. Actually, this comes up a lot in client calls. I hear it especially like so often what I found in our calls is that, a developer marketing person who is maybe less technical will kind of have a hard time understanding like, why am I going to put all the resources together to like organize this huge event, this competition, and then maybe I get some leads that are maybe just junior developers out of it. Like they have a hard time like drawing the line there. And as a software developer myself, I understand the line a little better, but you tell me like, what do you hear from customers? Why do they want to do hackathons? What are kind of the good reasons that people are doing it, and what really do they get out of it?
Yeah, for sure. So there's two sides, right? There's the why do people participate in them? And then why do people sponsor them? The people that participate in them get inspired to build, and they learn, and they can improve their craft. And it's one thing to read. We believe content is really important. We do a lot of it. You all are amazing at it, and they all work together. But it's not enough in order to, you want all of the above. You want the good content there, but then you need to incentivize them and inspire them to make. So on the developer side, look, deadlines create urgency that, that developers often can use. There are prizes given without taking intellectual property. You learn one of the best ways, which is through building, not just being in a classroom, but by actual building. And they're also fun, and they can meet other people and that sort of thing, and scratch these creative itches that they have on something they might want to make. So those are a lot of the reasons. And then on the organizer side, there's a metric I like to share a lot, which is between 5% and 33% of anybody that clicks the register button for one of our hackathons goes on to spend days, weeks, or months building and submitting. So if you compare that to going to a conference, to reading one piece of content alone with nothing else, et cetera, it
Mm-hmm.
blows it away. It's between
Yeah.
5% and 1/3 of everyone who clicks a button goes and makes something. So I think those in the developer marketing, developer relations community, yes, it does take work. Makes sense to try and get help if you can. And if not, one can try doing it themselves. But the value is that you get a community who actually is incentivized to learn and build in
Yeah.
a world where everyone's trying to market to developers. So there are other reasons, but I think those are the key ones. I'll just say that my entire history, I've heard people say, our hackathon's over, or is our hackathons
Sure.
out, and they grow every single year because it's not a gimmick. It's just really trying to give something to people in order to, which is an incentive in order to try and learn and build with your tool.
Yeah, I love it. So you said a few things there that I'll kind of double down on, just being a former developer and having been really in their head space. The big one is one of our big jobs as software developers is never stop learning. And I think sometimes people outside of the software development world don't realize how much that is true for software developers, because the tools are constantly changing. And in today's world, I mean, we got AI stuff coming. It's not stopping. There's not some magical threshold where now all the tools have been built and we're just going to make software the same way for 100 years. Like, it is constantly changing. And so one of the big challenges I had as a developer was staying on top of the latest things and getting the excuse to try the latest things, because you can't do it all at work in production. You've got to have some time to experiment with things that is outside of that. And that's where hackathons can be really, really interesting and compelling for a software developer to join at any level of experience. And again, like a lot of times when people ask me about hackathons, they'll say, "Was it all just junior developers who are trying to build their portfolio?" Like, absolutely not. Like, anybody with 5 or 10 years of experience still needs to keep doing that. I mean, you can't stop learning. So I
Right.
think that's a really important thing. And the other thing I would say for the sponsors is, to me, it comes down to trust. And it's honestly the same kind of thing that we do with our content and that anybody in developer marketing is trying to improve, is how do I build a stronger relationship with better trust between our product and our users? And a hackathon is a way for people in a low stress environment, or kind of a fun environment, to build something, build up trust with your product and see it in action. And then it becomes so much easier than, bring that into the company because you've already built something with it. So I think it's
Yeah.
a really compelling and interesting, exciting way to kind of get the word out and try something new.
Yeah, and there's two things you said that I think are interesting. One is, and you mentioned this in the previous question, this idea of younger or junior developers. So we're fortunate to power on our platform, the majority of college hackathons around the globe. We work with our partners, MLH, who are terrific, and we think it's super important to be reaching developers when they're starting. I mean, look, I got my first American Express card when I was my first day at school at campus, and have had it
Yep,
ever
same.
since. There's this idea of
Yep.
going exactly like the two people on this webinar started early. So we think that's really important to get people when they're junior. But I will say the overlap in our community, and I love them. And I think in-person college hackathons are incredible for they're more fun, yeah, and there's a lot of community around them, and you get people earlier. There's not a lot of overlap in our community between those that participate in in-person college hackathons and our professional hackathons. They like that community. They want to be doing what their friends are doing. They have a million different things, and so there truly is a separate community for the most part. It's as people, are older and working professionally, and we've been doing this for like 12, 13 years. So, as they matriculate out of college, they start participating. And those are the ones that participate in the professional hackathons. They have jobs. They're generally employed. They're interested in learning these tools so that they can become better developers and upskill. And the vast majority are employed. One thing you did mention AI. I just think it's important to say never in my career have I seen anything change or transform hackathons like AI has. Almost every
Yeah.
hackathon that we're doing has some AI component. And that's because if you can't just talk about AI, you've got to tinker and build and experiment in order to uncover the value. And so hackathons plus AI is really quite exploded like nothing I've ever seen.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. I actually had that on my notes to come back to. So let's definitely
Cool.
put a
We'll
pin in
do
that
it.
and come back. Okay. What are they not good for? Because I actually get this question sometimes from, especially, and I'll just put some context. I hear it from early stage startups a lot. They're like, man, it's going to take a lot of time and resources, and the payoff period might be long. Like, should I be doing hackathons early on? And I mean, I have some opinions, but I think you probably have more informed opinions. And so I'd want to hear from you, Brandon, like, what's it not an answer for? Because no one channel is a panacea. No, nothing's perfect. Like,
Yeah.
when do you tell people maybe you're not ready for a hackathon?
I think two things. One is the structure. If what you want as an output is that you want to own the applications, like you're using it as a
Mm,
procurement thing, like, oh, I want someone to build this thing for me. I'm going to run a hackathon. Tons of people are going to like do it. I'll pick the best and get it on the cheap. Bad idea. That's not a hackathon. We don't let them on our platform, and it's not a hackathon. That's a cheap procurement
right,
that some
right.
people think is about spec work and that kind of thing. So we see people come in with those. That's not a good reason to do it. It's not that you want to own the applications. Apple doesn't want to own the app on their iPhone. They just want you to build on iOS so that they can grow their ecosystem. So that's one. In terms of like the stages, no, we think hackathons are great with early stages. Just expectations should be lower. I think one thing we'll probably get to is what makes a great hackathon. What are those components? And maybe at that time I'll share more about what those things might be, and it probably relate to how junior you are in certain places. But if the expectations are relatively low, we don't think hackathons are just a one-off marketing event. They should just
Hmm.
be an ongoing outreach that you're doing it regularly. We have a new feature. We want to incentivize people to do it. We're going to have another quarterly hackathon, or every 6 months hackathon, not a one-off, so that you're constantly growing that. And they also, to this last point on this, is they work great as an umbrella initiative over the other things you're doing. So you're going to conferences, you've got content, you're streaming, you're doing all kinds of things, and you can have a virtual hackathon where when you're doing those efforts, you send them to hey, check this out. You can win A or B and get technical support and that kind of thing. So expectations are lower, but absolutely would not discourage smaller companies. I think in some ways it's crucial.
Yeah. You said a thing that I point people to a lot in developer marketing and developer relations, which is that it's not one channel. And you have to stop, kind of break with your thought that one channel is what's going to make us win in the long run. If you look at all the biggest companies that do dev tools, it's like multi-channel, omni-channel, whatever you want to call that, right? They do events, and those are built off of like conference talks that are made from blog posts, which then, the ideas they get at conferences feed into more blog posts, which then feeds into what we can do with our product and the hackathons around the product. And then what people build there gives them ideas for blog posts. It's like this you really got to have some people that understand how to tie all that together and kind of use one channel to then generate ideas for other channels, essentially. And not that
Absolutely.
it's like I don't like to tell somebody you have to do all that or else it's not worth doing anything. Like, it's not that black and white, but it's more like how can you kind of get two or three channels set up that feed each other. And I think again, hackathons are a great place to start from, like, let's generate content off those hackathons. Let's generate product ideas off the hackathons. Let's, like, just all that, and as well as community building. And then you can have an internal community based off of the work that's done there and things like that. That's really cool. So
Definitely. The
yeah,
very first step in a hackathon after you register is going to be go sign up for our to get our API or our developer
yep,
tool. Read this content in this tutorial. By the way, we have this educational content in case you're interested. Here's our Discord or whatever it is to join that. And all of a sudden, when you're incentivizing them, there are some prizes, there are cool initiatives you're trying to get them to do to inspire them. You now bring in all that other stuff totally.
yep. So you alluded to this, and this was on my list of questions. So let's do it. What makes a good hackathon? Are there like five or six
Yeah.
key components? Because I could see people doing the DIY route, at least their first time to try it. Maybe they're not sure if they want to invest big into it. And I could see it being one of those efforts that quickly snowballs into how much there is involved. Like, what are some of the highlight things that you guys point out, like kind of separate those that sort of don't really go as well as people
Yeah.
plan versus the ones that really take off?
Yeah, so every hackathon is different. Every company is different. Every product's different. There is no like you will get X, Y, or Z exact numbers afterwards. These are initiatives, but the we've looked back through all of the data, and we've noticed that there are four things that push things to the higher ranges of outcomes. One is promotion marketing. If people don't hear about this, they're not going to register or submit. It's just a fact. So with our customers, we have a really large community in the millions. We let our community know and also encourage our customer to let their community know and to re-engage their existing developers. Really, the more that they hear about it, the better, because developers, as you know, are busy, in demand, have a million things going, and they're marketing averse. They block ads in their browser more than any other professional group, but yet they're building our future and they are interested in learning about valuable tools. So, it's important to reach them. And so that's one, which is promotion. The second is that the competition should be interesting. This is a bit of art and science, but
Hmm.
it really means that there's a product that is valuable, that's going to really help people. And there's enough of them out there to help. We've done competitions that focus on bioinformatics groups at medical schools. That's fine. It's just going to be smaller. If you're looking for larger numbers, a product should be, valuable in a big enough market. And as for the themes, we can work on that, whether they go big or whether they go broad. But generally, that's what makes something interesting.
Yep.
The third is that there's tech support. So if people start using a tool and they get stuck and there's nobody that can help them, then they're going to bounce. And then the last is fair prizes, which can be a broad range, but it really depends on the ask and who one is going after. But if you add up first, second, third, some honorable mentions, and you think about developers' time and what it's worth, there should be prizes that are fair. It doesn't have to all be cash too. It can be in-kind
Yeah.
prizes and meetings and stuff like that. So those four things: the marketing, that the competition is interesting, that there's sufficient tech support and fair prizes, are really what would give you the best chances. So
Yeah.
to that question earlier about, if you're just starting out, promotion might be a little bit harder because maybe they don't have a community and we're introducing people to the first time. Doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done, just lower expectations to some
Hmm.
degree. In terms of the competition being interesting, doesn't mean that it's necessarily any less interesting. There just might be name recognition like that, and they're going to have to make sure there's enough prizes and that there's tech support. But if those things are in place, I think it's great.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the tech support and maybe specifically like the documentation side of things, right? Because this actually comes up with us a lot. We tell clients like we can't really go write great tutorials and do video tutorials for you if you don't have any support, like docs. Like, you have to have some basic level documentation or something that, even if it's, we've done it occasionally with internal docs that were just, kind of gave us enough of a working point. What's you all's kind of minimum threshold that you recommend? I mean, there's probably like a minimum threshold just to get by, but then there's probably like a recommended threshold of, like, if you really want people to take this seriously, you're going to have to give them a little more to go on. What would you kind of say to that? Like, how much does a company need to have as well as far as documentation and support available?
That's a great question. I think one way to frame it in the hackathon is to actually explain where the company is. We've been around this long. Our documentation explains A, B, and C. We're interested in improving it and looking for your feedback and can certainly ask that as part of the hackathon as well. So as long as there's sort of a straightforward explanation of where one company is, there isn't necessarily a hard and fast rule. Sure, the better the documentation, the clearer it is, then the more time people will save and the less chance they have to jump. But if I had to answer that, I would probably say, obviously a description of endpoints and how one uses it. And then at the very least, that is, minimum. There needs to be some documentation. I would be shocked if it's rare that we don't see that happen. It might be that it could be improved, but there generally is something. And then something to explain, where you're actually seeing or reading how one might use it with potentially some sample code and get to hello world or something similar like that. I think those are generally basics. And then
Yeah.
beyond that is gravy. But what about you? What do you see?
So, yeah, I think that for us, when I think about like the things that we need in documentation, we do need like at least the endpoints available and what they're going to do, right? Some idea there. But I think some people have had is sort of primitive a collection is like a Postman collection, which you can work from. Like it just we all know how to download Postman and use it. And then on the other hand, we've had others where they've already got whole libraries of tutorials and getting started guides, and they're looking to kind of next
Right.
level up their content, right? Like go to the next level. And I think what you said is exactly right. It's like I think of content and the sort of priority list for content in terms of what are the most core essential things you need versus the things that you only do once you're huge. And the things you only do once you're huge are things like you're writing about SEO related topics that are completely unrelated to your product, but there might be a tiny bit of crossover with your core user group, right? And when you're a massive publicly traded company, you can absolutely do that. When you're a little smaller, you don't start there, right? Like you start with what's our product do, and so that sort of core level documentation is really important. The hard part I find, and this is, again, goes back to your point about like be honest with where you're at, is earlier stage companies are often changing their products so quickly that it's very
Yeah.
hard for them to document or keep it up to date. And I imagine that comes up in hackathons. But that said, I imagine again, this happens with hackathons. It's like we often will tell a client, hey, look, we figured out this tutorial, we got it working, but your docs were out of date and this thing was wrong and this is how it actually works. And then they'll sort of we give them that feedback to update it. I'm sure that comes up in hackathons too. So it
Definitely.
can be
Yeah,
good
we,
even
we
if you aren't as mature.
yeah, and I think that's really the minimum. I would say one other thing that's worth doing, we encourage as part of the hackathon are, office hours or type of
Yeah.
live stream office hour website. It could be Discord office hours. It could be a video, but where you're just saying, okay, right, you've seen that maybe, or you've watched that maybe, but what's your specific question? And people can kind of get more one-on-one help at that time. So there is effort involved in a hackathon. Of course, it's never going to be set it or forget it. I don't think it's different for any other marketing initiative.
Yeah. Okay. So another one that comes up that I'm always curious about, and I don't remember who I talked to about this recently, but what do you do when your product is kind of a one-trick pony? And here's an example, like authentication. I don't want to demean authentication. It's an extremely essential service to any dev's workflow and any, back-end product and front-end product. It's just like you got to have it. But it's also hard for me at this point to creatively think of like what's a good hackathon around authentication? Is it even a hackathon worthy type product? Or, and how does that work? Or how have you guys seen that get creative? Because again, this is that art and science, and you don't have to come up with an example based on authentication on the fly, but like with other one trick pony or like smaller tools that seem so narrow, how do you come up with ideas like that?
So we have several hackathons with Okta. And so I've got one, I'm going to put it in the chat. But if you go to devpost.com and you type in Okta in search, there's an example right there, which is about that. And so in this case, and we've done several, but that's a really great question, which is what if you have a tool and it's kind of binary? It's just on or off. It's not how creatively are you necessarily using it. It's just like, have you installed it or not? Should you then do a
Yeah.
hackathon? Yeah, we do them all the time. Yeah, sure. It takes a little bit more creativity. In this case, we talked about AI. That is generally what is happening these days because you can build something that requires that you use the basic tool. We also work with hosting companies, and most of them too. And it's like, okay, you're
Mm.
hosted by them, but then what? And so it's very common to do that. So we work with you on something that's creative. I would say in general these days, probably something that's AI related. I can give a little bit more about that, which is by AI related, that doesn't necessarily mean like, here's a data set and optimize it. These days, most of it is sort of generative AI and really trying to say, well, okay, how can you move something interesting forward with a baseline of using our tool? Yeah, so there's an example
Yeah.
there. Happy to go in deeper if interested.
No, that's helpful. And I think, yeah, giving people like you've examples is like they can go search for it. That's perfect. Because I knew you guys had worked with Okta and other auth providers, I imagine, along the way. And that's it just to me, it's like, it's so interesting to think about like any tool can be, in real life, it's going to be applied in many ways. And so the question is, how do we generate interesting constraints so that it can be applied in different creative ways in a hackathon? And I think that's kind of a fun thing to think about. Okay,
Yeah,
cool. So
I'll add one more
yeah, go
thing. I
ahead.
know that I promise I'm not trying to slip this in for purposes other than we talked about the private hackathon product. I agree that private hackathons for your employees is not relevant, but I do want to talk about something. We have a case study coming out really soon, which is private hackathons with your customers. This very much is in the dev relations world or
Yeah.
for sales prospects, et cetera. And as we all know lately with the changes that have been happening in the industry, a lot of DevRel is moving more toward revenue, not just toward long tail in general. So I actually think it's useful. If you have key accounts, anybody in DevRel, or it could be sales engineers, it could be salespeople, could be other teams in marketing, but often we're seeing dev relations people working with key accounts. Running hackathons with one or more key accounts on Devpost for Teams, which is private, because let's just say Dropbox, who was going to be on this, like they're not going to want to show whatever they're working on in a public setting. That's actually been fantastic lately and a really great use case. So it is dev relations related, which is if any of you are either are or are working with people on your key accounts, you wanted to get them to build, whether they're prospective customers or customers, I would consider private hackathons. All the same things that we've said here apply. The same stuff with content, the same thing with how to structure a hackathon and more.
Yeah. I think this is something we actually, I'll kind of draw a parallel in content. This comes up often too, where sometimes people sort of start to run out of what they think are the like most obvious public facing, I don't know, content pieces that they can do. But something that often unlocks this is like when you think about your biggest customers or your biggest prospects right now, what is one thing that if they saw it, like we could write about it or we could demonstrate it, would sort of unlock them and be like, oh, I see, like this is how I'd use the product, or this makes it so easy for me to implement that I'm ready to go. And I think that kind of goes to your same point. It's like, what could we sort of show the customer we can build for them or with, with our tool? Is a really cool way to like encourage that kind of just get that conversation moving and the creative juices flowing and give it's almost like you need to unlock enough time for them to just think about it really deeply. And I think that could be valuable in its own right.
I want to make sure I'm understanding. Maybe you can rephrase that a little bit more for me. I understood what you're saying, that sometimes just being able to say, here's how you can use the tool, or here's a key selling point that can unlock it. But maybe you can dig in a little bit deeper in
Yeah.
terms of what
Like
you're asking.
for us, for example, like say you are a database type company, you've got some kind of backend as a service or database. Often a client might come to them and say, hey, does this work for e-commerce? And it's like, yeah, technically it can work for anything. It's agnostic, right? But like they want to, what they mean is I want to see an example in e-commerce. I want to see an example that integrates with my front end that I've already like built out, things that like sort of show them not just that it does work, but show them it's working. It's like, here's a demonstration in practice. What that allows them to do, because often like the buyer might be different from the implementer. So what that can allow them to do is the customer who's the buyer can kind of show their implementer, their engineering team, like, hey, this is valuable and here's how they use it, or they demonstrate that it can be used. So again, like backend as a service
Yeah.
is an example of showing more front-end integrations or showing more ways that it can be used in specific ways sort of helps unlock certain buyers that maybe got stuck because their engineering team was a little more skeptical.
Got it. Yeah. And so was there a
Well,
question around
no,
how hackathons could potentially, or just more of a comment?
well, tie-in was more just an observation. Like it's the same idea. It's like if you're building this internal hackathon with a customer, you kind of get that same level of unlock where you're able to build out things that people, maybe just
I see.
imagined, but you're actually going to
I
put it
think
into
it's a
practice.
I think that's a terrific point, and I see what you're getting at there. Yeah, actually, this case study that'll be coming out soon, and I can mention it's with SAP and a
Mhm.
bunch of their customers. Actually, there was an instance where, again, this is public information, publicly approved information, where there was a senior person in the room who had heard about it, authorized stuff, but had not actually messed around with the tool, had not actually touched it, and so getting them to build with your tools really does pay dividends. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So let's talk about promoting a hackathon. And obviously the big advantage working with you guys, and I'm, not to oversell it, but like having this big community of like publicly, ready to go software engineers is massively valuable. I can see that. But what do I do if I'm a company that doesn't have that or doesn't have the resources yet to work with you? Are there any best practices? I know it's not magic. Like, you can post about it on Twitter. You can try to run ads, I'm sure. You could try to do some things like what really works? What do you try to encourage companies to do besides just working with you guys?
Yeah, everything you possibly can. So certainly, if you're working with a company, then having them let their community know. And the way we do that is through email, also through Discord, and on our site featured hackathons. And when people sign up to Devpost, they say what their skills are and their interests are, and then we target them based on that. Let them know about hackathons that are relevant to them. So that's really big. With our full marketing package, we're bringing the majority of submitters the vast majority of the time. But on the customer side, regardless of whether you're working with somebody or not, absolutely letting your community know, that could be prospects, that could be existing developers already, just re-engaging them and letting them know, and then encouraging them to let other people know. Partnerships always work well. So yeah, if you can have usually a small limited number of partners to help spread the word. Hey, we'll link to your API or your developer tools on our resources page in exchange for you letting community know, maybe contributing some prize money. That's an option. You want to be careful, in our experience, not to have too many partners with tools, because the more requirements that you have to build
Right.
within competition, then the fewer submissions there will be. You want to try to keep it as easy as possible. And then of course, website, ensuring that it's promoted on all the websites. There's nothing particularly unique. It's just making sure that everybody knows through email, through social channels, through any real-time community, through any partner's website, and also ensuring that what you tell them is valuable. Here's
Yeah.
what you'll learn. Here's what the deadline is. Here are what you can win. All of these things are really important. And that's just promoting it in the first place. Then once they've registered, there's a whole other group of things to get them to actually submit.
Right, because you want to make sure that they follow through all the way, which is a multi-step process. They're going to build a little app. They're going to have to submit it within the requirements and time span. So I imagine is there like a best practice there? Do we do like a daily follow-up, a weekly follow-up? Like what do you usually recommend?
Yeah, so it's easy to register. It's click a button, essentially, fill out a
Right.
little form, and you've registered. But now finding time in my life to build and come up with an idea and get it working and just submit it, that's the tough part. That's why we like hackathons, because as we said, between 5% and a third of them actually go in and do that, which we're blown away by. But yeah, the tricks are not daily check-ins, definitely not. Developers hate email, and but
A
you
little
still
too
got to let
much.
them
Yeah.
know. Still got to let them know. Trying to get them
Yeah.
into your Slack or your Discord or whatever you're using could be
Okay.
useful for those that
Yeah.
actually want to do it. And just being helpful. Hey, there's a month to the deadline. There's 2 weeks to the deadline, or we have a week here. And by the way, we're doing these office hours. We have this information or this content for you to do, trying to be as helpful as possible. And then that's just to let them reminders. And then we do suggest a couple check-ins, which is just, are you submitting on
Hmm.
Devpost? It's part of our, we set it up for our managed hackathons to be part of the offering, which are check-ins. And we can kind of get a sense, how are you planning to submit or not, which gives us a better sense of that.
Yeah. Let's talk too about incentives, because I imagine that's kind of part of the promotion. It kind of ties in together, right? Like I want to promote it, but I also have to tell people what are they going to get if they win, or what are the top prizes, what are the kind of layers of tiers we could get. What have you guys found works really well for incentive? And is money the best motivator, or is the answer is probably it depends. Like, what does it depend on?
Yeah, so We tell people a wide range of between $10,000 and $50,000 in prizes. We've done them in the millions and hundreds of thousands. We've had them without them, competitions to get a meeting with Michelle Obama, for example, things like this.
Yeah,
So
cool.
it, or a political figure or an interesting figure in general. So it really depends. And again, you got to think about, well, if there's a first place, there's a second place, or a third place, that as well. We encourage a mix of cash and in-kind prizes. We do think cash is important. You don't have to, but it is more common and it's more of a sign of respect for their time that they're
Hmm.
putting into it. Think of all the people that don't win in their time. So this is just for the few that do. And on in-kind prizes, it depends. If it's a corporate competition, like either a private one or one geared toward enterprise, it might be more about conference tickets, exposure to other customers, exposure to the executives, potentially promise meetings with venture firms there, that kind of a thing. So it depends. Swag's always a good thing to have. Credits is pretty much a no-brainer. Where if you have
Yeah.
a product that costs money, you're going to have to give them out anyway. So it's really a mix, trying to think about what's interesting and what kind of developer you're trying to attract. And it's not just prizes. As we talked about earlier, there's other elements of hackathons that matter a lot, which is deadlines. And then there's a competitive spirit. And it's not so much about
Hmm.
beating other people. It's really like a marathon. You're trying not to win the New York Marathon. You just want to set a goal and accomplish it. So there is something to be said for that as an incentive too, which I think is unique to
Yeah.
hackathons.
I like the idea of the incentives being kind of relevant for the hackathon or the product or the something, like some way like tied in. So if it's, AWS throwing a hackathon, they give you free tickets to some event they're doing in your city or whatever. Like that kind of thing makes a lot of sense because it's kind of like building that cycle. The other thing I'll say, this kind of mirrors my experience with Draft.dev. We have 350 or so writers, all software engineers that write for us just nights and weekends on the side, basically. And of course, we pay them all for their work. But honestly, for a lot of them, especially more senior ones, the money is not the needle mover. It's they get credit on the other, people's websites. They get to learn about cool tools. They get to write for some of their favorite companies. And so it's like, yes, I believe in like rewarding people for their time and like cash is a little part of that. But also it's important to think about like what really motivates the kind of people who are going to do this and like a meeting with Michelle Obama. Like that's no amount of money can get you that, right? Like I mean, I guess some amount
Right.
of money maybe does, but like it's very hard. Like it's not something I would be able to go do on my own. Whereas,
Sure.
$300, I can make $300 in a couple hours if I'm a software developer. So it's like a little less of a mover.
Yeah, and that was also an extreme example, but there could be
Yeah.
meetings. So a typical example would be right. So if it's a company hackathon, getting your work in front of the executives, or
Right.
getting help with intellectual property and patent development,
Yeah.
or these kinds of things matter. It is definitely worth about. Yes, I think you're 100% right. Which is think about the product, be creative with the product, and think about the audience. But money there's a menu. Different people have motivations. So some people really
Yes.
only care
Yeah.
about the cash, others don't. In general, it's a mix. You don't want to spend
Yeah.
all this time and not get anything. So it really
Yeah.
it really just depends.
Yeah. That's a good
And
point.
it
I mean,
also
you
comes
want to
down to
like,
budget
yeah.
at the end. At
Yeah.
the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's
Yeah.
the customer. How much do they have available, and then we make it work within that. And so much of the time, it's that.
There was something I was talking to Richard on your team recently about hackathons, and one thing he pointed out, which I never would have thought of, and I think this is worth mentioning, just because if I never thought of it, then I'm sure some people listening here would never thought of it, is there are some legal implications to paying out prizes to people all over the world, and often these like you
Yes.
point out, most of these hackathons are remote. But there are actual like laws and requirements of how you can and can't pay people in certain countries and areas, and so tell me, you don't have to go
Oh
through
yes.
any detail there, but tell me high level, like, what have you guys learned about that? And what does anybody throwing their own hackathon need to know about that?
You mean how in Brazil you have to give out gold bars as prizes?
Right.
Not a
Yeah.
joke.
He told me.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are experts at that, and so from a project management standpoint, and I see that there's a question about our offering. Happy to get to that during the
Yeah.
Q and A if that matter if that's interesting. But yeah, so we have different levels of project management, but in general, we cover the rules and we cover prize fulfillment for pretty much all three of the packages that we offer for project management. And then there's varying levels of how involved we get in everything from helping people, encouraging them to submit, in reviewing their submissions, and more. So, and spreading the word. But yeah, you've got to be careful. You don't want to change the rules unless you absolutely have to. And if you do, you have to let everybody know. A lot of in-person hackathons, to be frank, don't really, they play, fast and
Yeah.
loose with rules because it's like in person and a few people or whatever. But we're talking virtual global competitions in general. There's fairness and there's laws about this, and you have to be fair. And so you can't just say, oh, we're going to give a prize to this person, even though our rules said X or Y. So working with an organization that can help you with that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I just was, as I was talking to Richard about, he's telling about the legal and like the amount of hoops you're going through with certain countries and stuff. It's like, man, that alone is like a reason to outsource that just because being an entrepreneur, I hate legal stuff. It's like one of those things that just slows you down. And I know why it's there. It's all good. But
Yeah,
it's never a fun thing to deal with, right? So anyway,
right.
good to know. And definitely good to look into, especially if you're going to do remote, you're going to be paying people around the world, know what the right way to do that is, and to run a competition that is seen as a legal competition, with, like you said, the rules are very clear and not changed, and doesn't
That's
fall
right.
into
And while there are
that like
downsides
gambling
of
or
that,
something. Yeah.
yes, exactly. You don't want to go up. All these rules are there because they don't want the gambling. They don't want you to be confused with the gambling folks. So, but I would say in general, it's not so bad, and it's worth it. If you want to do a virtual hackathon, that's scalable. You have reaching more enterprise developers. They have more
Yeah.
time to work on their applications. They're going to be more polished versus sort of raw prototypes, and those are the advantages. Why it's worth doing.
Yeah. Yeah, Steve asked a question that I was going to ask, so I'll start with this one, Clayton. But I think, yeah, let's get into some questions here. What metrics would you use for a hackathon success? And I'm going to guess the answer is it depends on the organization, what your goals are, et cetera. But what are some things you see commonly?
Absolutely. So generally, there's going to be a number of folks that sign up and participate. So how many participants you have, that's going to really that matters to people. Again, it differs based on how new the company is, et cetera, what the prizes are, how well they're run and put together, these kinds of things. But the reason people are doing this is to grow their developer community. That's one of them. The other is to actually engage them to get them built. So that would be the number of projects. And they don't just look at quantity; they look at quality. So we use input metrics as a framework, along with objectives and key results OKRs. And the input metrics for us are around how easy are we making it to submit, and then ultimately what are the things that we can do to drive quantity and quality of submissions, which are some of the key outputs. So A, developers in the community that you've, B, the projects. Now, there's additional stuff, and it does depend, but you can get product feedback. So you have all these people going through this flow and using your product. That's valuable feedback to give to your product team or engineers, et cetera.
Right.
Hiring is for us on enterprise hackathons is sort of less of a thing, but it certainly happens all the time. You can reach out to these people with their permission if you're interested from a recruiting standpoint. Those are more, but those are the big ones.
Yeah,
It's
that's
growing the
cool. I wouldn't
developer
have thought of that.
community and the
Yeah.
quality and quantity of applications or projects that are built.
I wouldn't have immediately thought of the hiring one, but that actually makes a lot of sense too. It's like, they're getting familiar with your product and they're kind of having a touch point with your team. And so if they do have the skills that you're looking for, it makes sense to reach out.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, let's talk about AI and then also kind of dovetails into one of the questions here, which is about like how are hackathons changing and evolving? And I think there's lots of tie-ins to AI, but there's probably other things that you see on the horizon there. What do you see as like the future of hackathons? Obviously, we don't think they're dying or going away, but like what could be different about them, or how's AI impacting them? What are you seeing?
I think AI is impacting them in every single way, from the tools that people are using, which can now, to some degree, think for themselves. Not everything has to be programmatically created. It can be through learning, reinforcement, and that's reinforcement learning, and that's actually huge. We're seeing that in the tools. We're also just seeing in opportunities, and we've already begun on this. To save people time with hackathons. So actually our users tell us they sometimes spend up to 20 hours, sometimes as much as they do building, thinking of what their idea should be, which is shocking to me, but it's true. And so for some people, helping come up with ideas, and we have some that are already live now on this, is a really useful tool, which is to help save time for that. But there's so much more, from improving team building uh, to summarizing the results of a hackathon for everybody. So it can be in both the management, but then also in the creation of what you're actually building. So I think it's tremendous. I don't think it's going away. It's like the invention of the personal computer in many of the views of people like myself, but it is early. And so I
Yeah.
think one note on AI is that some companies are like, yeah, no, we're not touching this right now. We have to figure out more things around data and privacy. And of course, there's responsible AI. We've done a bunch of competitions focused on responsible AI. So I think that's going to be the biggest bet, which is that it'll be easier to participate in a hackathon and also create a project. The last thing that I think is absolutely important is that now you have people that aren't developers who are able to participate in
Yeah.
hackathons. Anybody can come up with improvements using a chat interface, which then is going to obviously change and grow in many ways. And I think it'll be much easier to create applications. Think of low code, no code, uh, you know, to exponential improvement.
Yeah, I'm very interested and overall bullish on the fact that AI, low code, lots of I'm just going to put all those into they are like higher level abstractions of code because ultimately they're generating code way deep down, but like you see less and less of the code to interact with the machine, right? All of those are so impactful for just allowing creative, interesting ideas to come to life faster and with fewer resources. And people often will talk about how that means that means developers aren't going to be needed. It's like, well, somebody's creating all these tools that are higher level abstractions, first of all, but second of all, each idea spawns its own ecosystem of ideas and complementary things. So I think that's how software is always done. If it were true that higher level abstractions destroyed the need for software developers, then C++ would have destroyed the need for software developers, and it didn't. It only
Absolutely.
expanded. So there's just, what software developers write or what it looks like might change over time to some extent, but like people who understand how computers work and how they get, information around each other and all that they're going to be even more essential. And so anyway, I'm excited about
Absolutely.
seeing that too. Yeah. Yeah.
And for
Um,
those that are looking to upskill, in AI, I think hackathons are a great way to do it, to mess around,
right.
tinker, and have a deadline for oneself and actually get it done and accomplish that.
Yeah. Two more things I want to touch on. Private hackathons, because we've been kind of hinting at that. Let's talk about that really quick. And then the last thing will be
Sure.
kind of budgeting and then, what it's like to engage with you guys versus DIY version. So what's a typical use case? What are companies trying to get out of a private hackathon? And how is it a little different from a public one?
Yeah. So setting aside the employees within your company, the engineers, because that's sort of somewhat of a different topic. Although for any who's listening, their company does hackathons. We save them a tremendous amount of time, grow participation. If you think about all the employees and their salaries and the value of their time, it's worth it. That's a subscription product. We charge by the seat. But no, it's customer hackathons it's really what I said earlier. So probably don't even need to spend too much time about it, other than to say that if you have customers, key accounts, and you want to incentivize them in the same way, then you can use Devpost for Teams for that. And we also have these built-in templates where you can save a hackathon and launch one with one click. It comes with like 15 or 20
Cool.
existing templates for a hackathon, and anybody can spin them up. So for that, you don't even need services. We'll help you with stuff, but it's actually self-serve for your customers and your employees. And that's what
Yeah.
Devpost for Teams are. It's private, totally secure. You can get in through SSO. You can't use your devpost.com account to get into it.
Right.
Totally different. And we're working on it because there have been a tremendous amount of requests starting with the pandemic, moving onward to where there's now been this big focus on shifting to revenue and customers. So that's why we
Yeah.
do it.
Cool. Okay, let's talk about cost. So
And then
let's
on the
pretend I'm going to
services.
set up. Yeah, let's talk about cost. So pretend I'm going to set up my own hackathon and I have myself and Clayton, we're going to be the ones running it ourselves, right? Well, let's take, we're going to spend for our time, whatever that is, and you can give me an estimate on what that might be. But then what other costs are involved there? The prize costs, the things like what's a typical range of budgets that a company might spend?
Sure. So we have a couple different packages. We have packages for project management, which is us assisting with the competition. Those are for the most part required. And then we have three packages for marketing promotion. Those are optional. It really depends on whether you want that. Um, You're looking at 10K at the minimum and 80K at the
Mhm.
maximum, depending on
Okay.
what you want to do for both marketing and project management. If you want to do everything yourself, we can just give you the platform alone. That's exceptionally rare, but it's possible. We just want to make sure that the rules are good, and that's why we do the rules and the prize fulfillment, because we want to make sure that there's a quality there. By
Yeah.
the way, if you're running an in-person hackathon, it's free. You can just use our platform for any in-person event. And that's how we sign
Oh,
up
cool.
between 3
Okay.
and 5,000 developers every week and grow this community, because we're powering all of these grassroots competitions around the globe. So that's generally, and then in terms of prizes, 10 to 50K range is encouraged. It can be higher, it can be lower. It's just that's generally what we tell people. So you're looking at like
Eh,
10K on the low end, plus whatever prizes you want to give, and 80K at the high end, plus whatever prizes you can give, unless you're running everything yourself, which would be less than that. It's around
Right.
$3,000 for the month.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. So and they typically run for a month or so. Just
Yeah, usually there's a submission period of about six
yeah.
weeks, but it
Okay.
can be shorter, it can be longer.
Cool. Okay. Well, Brandon, we're at time, so I won't keep everybody extra long. This has been super helpful, just out of my own curiosity. I love to learn about anything dev marketing. This is a whole space that I've never run a hackathon. I've never had to, be the one in charge of it. So it's cool to learn. And I'm sure for listeners too, this is going to be really interesting and insightful. Where can people go to find out more about you or ask you questions? I assume devpost.com is the best starting point, but anything else you want to plug?
Devpost.com. Feel free to email me, Brandon at as well, anytime if you have any questions. And thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate the conversation. Thanks to everybody for the questions too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining everybody.